The summer heat shimmered like a vengeful mirage over the dusty ranch road, transforming the landscape into a pressure cooker of tension. Deputy Jake Hollister gripped the steering wheel of his patrol cruiser, his knuckles white beneath a thin layer of road dust and sweat. This wasn't going to be a typical call-out, and he knew it the moment he turned onto the Hawthorne property. Old Man Hawthorne's complaint had been cryptic, something about trespassing and property damage. But Jake had heard stranger stories in his 8 years with the county sheriff's department. Rural disputes were as common as tumbleweeds in these parts, usually involving property lines, water rights, or some long-standing family feud that predated living memory. As he approached the weathered fence line, Jake noticed something was off. The wooden posts leaned at awkward angles, several planks splintered and broken. What should have been a neat boundary between pastures looked like it had been trampled by something massive. His patrol car crunched over broken fence fragments, the sound sharp and intrusive in the otherwise silent landscape. The bull stood dead center in the middle of the damaged pasture. Not just any bull, this was a behemoth of an animal, its muscular frame a testament to years of careful breeding. Dark brown hide gleamed with sweat, muscles rippling beneath the surface like tightly coiled springs. Its eyes, surprisingly intelligent and filled with a cold calculation, locked onto Jake's cruiser. Jake had grown up around livestock. His grandfather had run cattle in this same county for decades, teaching him that every animal had its own personality. But this bull was different. There was something almost predatory in its stance, something that spoke of more than just territorial instinct. Old Man Hawthorne emerged from the weathered farmhouse, his lean frame moving with a surprising agility for a man in his 70s. Years of ranch work had carved him into something resembling weathered leather, tough, lean, and uncompromising. He walked with a purpose that immediately set Jake on edge. "Took you long enough," Hawthorne called out, his voice a gravelly bark that seemed to carry decades of frustration. "That damn bull's been causing trouble since sunrise." Jake stepped out of the cruiser, his hand unconsciously drifting near his belt. Not to his weapon. This wasn't that kind of situation, but to a notepad. Professional instinct died hard even on the most unusual calls. "What exactly happened, Mr. Hawthorne?" Jake asked, scanning the damaged fence and the immense bull that continued to watch them with an unsettling intensity. The old rancher's laugh was more of a sharp bark. "That beast? He's been breaking through fences, destroying property. And this morning," he paused, a look of pure disgust crossing his weathered face. "This morning he killed 3 of my best heifers." Jake knew livestock losses were serious business for ranchers. Each animal represented not just money, but months of careful breeding and care. But something in Hawthorne's tone suggested there was more to this story. The way he looked at the bull wasn't just anger, it was something closer to fear. Little did Jake know that the next few hours would transform what seemed like a routine property dispute into a confrontation that would become local legend. A story people would talk about for years to come. The next hour unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. Jake had called for backup, but out here in the rural stretches of Copper County, backup meant waiting. He'd walked the perimeter of the damaged pasture with Hawthorne, listening to the detailed account of destruction that had been building for weeks. "This ain't no ordinary bull," Hawthorne muttered, pointing to deep gouges in the earth where fence posts had been ripped from the ground. "I've raised cattle my entire life, and I'm telling you, something's wrong with this animal." Jake examined the evidence. Massive hoofprints told a story of incredible strength. The dead heifers lay in a nearby field, their bodies nearly torn apart, not just killed, but demolished. Forensic evidence suggested something beyond typical predatory behavior. The bull had attacked with a calculated fury that defied natural animal instincts. Hawthorne's grandson Tom arrived in a dusty pickup truck. A local veterinarian and part-time ranch hand, he brought a different perspective to the unfolding drama. His face was ashen as he inspected the carnage. "This bull," Tom said, his voice low, "it's not from our breeding line. I don't recognize it, and I know every animal on this ranch and the surrounding farms." Jake's investigative instincts kicked in. A strange bull appearing out of nowhere, destroying property, killing livestock. It didn't add up. Rural areas had their share of mysteries, but this felt different. Something was fundamentally wrong. As they talked, the bull watched, always watching. Tom pulled out some photographs from his truck, grainy images taken over the past few weeks. They showed the bull in different locations around the ranch, sometimes partially hidden, other times standing in plain sight. But something was off about these images. The bull seemed to shift, to change. Subtle differences in its markings, its stance. "Look," Tom pointed, "these photos were taken days apart. But look at the subtle differences." Jake studied the images. To an untrained eye, they might seem identical. But a cop's eye was trained to spot inconsistencies. The bull's coat pattern seemed to subtly change. Its muscle definition looked slightly different in each photo. Old Man Hawthorne broke the silence. "I heard stories," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Stories my grandfather used to tell about cattle that weren't quite cattle, creatures that could change that weren't natural. Tom rolled his eyes. Dad, not those old legends again. But Jake was listening. In his years as a deputy, he'd learned that local legends often contained kernels of truth. Rural communities preserved stories that city folks would dismiss as superstition. The bull shifted its weight. The movement was so slight, most would have missed it, but Jake caught it, a movement that was almost deliberate. "We need to figure out where this bull came from," Jake said firmly, "and we need to do it before something else happens." As if in response, a low rumble emerged from the bull's throat. Not a typical bovine sound. This was something else entirely, a sound that seemed to carry a warning. Darkness was falling, and nobody, not Jake, not Hawthorne, not Tom, was prepared for what was coming next. Night fell like a heavy curtain over the Hawthorne ranch. Jake decided to stay, setting up a makeshift surveillance point in his patrol cruiser. Tom had rigged up some additional lighting around the pasture, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and dance in unnatural patterns. Around midnight, the radio crackled to life. Sheriff Martin's voice cut through the static. "Jake, I've been making some calls. Got something weird from the county records." Jake leaned closer to the receiver. "Go ahead, Sheriff. That ranch 2 counties over, the Mercer property, they reported a similar incident 3 months back. Livestock killed, strange bull appearing out of nowhere. But here's the kicker. When they tried to investigate, the bull seemed to vanish." A chill ran down Jake's spine. Vanish wasn't a word law enforcement typically used. Suspects could hide, animals could run, but they didn't simply vanish. Outside, the bull remained motionless. Its silhouette was a dark mass against the moonlit pasture, almost like a statue. But Jake knew it was watching. Always watching. Tom approached the cruiser, carrying a thermos of coffee and a manila folder. "Found something in my grandfather's old records," he said, sliding into the passenger seat. "These aren't just random notes. They're detailed accounts." The folder contained yellowed newspaper clippings and handwritten journals dating back to the 1930s, stories of livestock disappearances, of strange animals that didn't behave like normal cattle, accounts that had been dismissed as rural superstition, passed down through generations. One particular entry caught Jake's eye. Written in faded ink, dated 1947, it described a bull that appeared during a drought. The entry spoke of strange occurrences, crops withering where the bull walked, livestock dying in unexplained ways. "My great-grandfather believed these weren't just animals," Tom said softly. "He thought they were something else." Jake was a man of facts, of evidence, but 8 years as a rural deputy had taught him that the world wasn't always as straightforward as textbooks suggested. Rural mysteries had their own logic, their own hidden truths. A sudden movement caught their attention. The bull was walking. Not the jerky, aggressive movement they'd seen before. This was different, calculated, purposeful. They approached Jake's patrol cruiser. Tom grabbed Jake's arm. "Don't move," he whispered. The bull stopped just yards away. Dawn broke with an unnatural stillness. The morning dew seemed to hang suspended, as if time itself had become reluctant to move forward. Jake hadn't slept, cooled its sleep. The events of the night played on repeat in his mind, that impossible smile burning into his memory. Sheriff Martin arrived just before sunrise, his weathered SUV kicking up dust as it rolled onto the Hawthorne property. He looked tired, older than his 62 years. "I've been making calls," he announced, bypassing any pleasantries. "Something's not right here." Tom had been researching through the night, his veterinary background and family history giving him a unique perspective. Spread across the hood of Jake's cruiser were maps, old photographs, and a collection of documents that told a fragmented story. "Look at this," Tom said, pointing to a series of topographical maps. "These markings, they're not random. They form a pattern. Every location where similar incidents have been reported follows a precise geometric alignment." Sheriff Martin leaned in, his experienced eyes scanning the documents. "Geometric alignment? What are you talking about?" Before Tom could respond, a low rumble interrupted them. Not from the bull, not exactly. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate, subtle at first, then with increasing intensity. The bull stood at the center of the pasture, but it was changing. Not physically, something else. The air around it seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from hot asphalt, but impossibly more intense. Jake's police radio crackled to life and died. His cell phone, nothing. Tom's digital camera began to malfunction, its screen flickering with static and impossible images that seemed to suggest shapes just beyond comprehension. "We need to get out of here," Sheriff Martin muttered, but nobody moved. Old Man Hawthorne emerged from the farmhouse carrying an ancient rifle. His eyes were clear, focused. A man who had seen something like this before. "It's happening again," he said, his voice a mixture of fear and resignation. The bull took a step forward, just one step, But that step seemed to contain an entire universe of movement. Impossible. Unnatural. Tom's research began to make a terrifying kind of sense. The documents suggested something more than a simple animal, something that had been moving across this landscape for generations. Not a creature of nature, but something that moved through nature. Used it. Manipulated it. The land remembers, Old Man Hawthorne said, almost to himself. The land always remembers. Jake's cruiser began to shake, slowly at first, then with increasing violence. Metal groaned. Windows began to crack. And the bull, if it could still be called a bull, watched with those impossible eyes. Something was about to happen. Something that would change everything they understood about their world. The bull took another step, and reality began to bend. The moment stretched, impossible to measure, impossible to comprehend. Jake's patrol cruiser collapsed inward, metal twisting like paper, windows shattering into dust that didn't fall but hung suspended in the air. Sheriff Martin stood frozen, one hand reaching for his weapon, muscles locked in mid-movement. Tom was the first to break the impossible stillness. It's not just a creature, he whispered, his veterinary training collapsing beneath the weight of something beyond scientific explanation. It's a collector. Old Man Hawthorne stepped forward, the ancient rifle in his hands no longer seeming like a simple weapon, but something else entirely. A key. A bridge. My grandfather told me, Hawthorne said, his voice cutting through the suspended reality, that some things don't belong to this world. They move between spaces. They collect memories, experiences. The bull, that could still be called a bull, began to shift, not physically, conceptually. It was as if multiple versions of the creature existed simultaneously. A bull. A shadow. Something mechanical. Something organic. Something that defied the very concept of singular existence. Jake felt something pulling at the edges of his consciousness. Memories that weren't his own. Experiences from generations past. Cattle drives. Land disputes. Moments of violence. Moments of profound connection to this unforgiving landscape. It feeds on boundaries. Tom realized suddenly. Physical boundaries. Emotional boundaries. The lines we draw to separate ourselves from something larger. The cruiser continued to collapse, now more memory than metal. Sheriff Martin remained suspended, a statue of action interrupted. Old Man Hawthorne raised the rifle, not to shoot, to communicate. We see you, he said. Not a threat, not a challenge, an acknowledgement. The bull, the thing, stopped. Slowly, the suspended moment began to dissolve. Metal relaxed back into something resembling a patrol car. The air became breathable again. Sheriff Martin blinked, momentarily disoriented. What the hell just happened? He muttered. Nobody answered, because nobody would believe them. In the days that followed, official reports would be filed. A routine investigation of property damage, livestock loss, standard rural incident. The patrol car would be written off as a total loss from an unexplained incident. But Jake knew different. Tom knew different. Old Man Hawthorne had always known. Some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. Some fences protect more than just land. And some creatures are collectors of something far more precious than mere physical territory. Years later, when Jake would tell this story, if he ever told it, he would always end the same way. Not with an explanation, but with a simple observation. Some things, he'd say, are better left unexplained. The Hawthorne Ranch remained. The fence was repaired. Life continued. But something had changed. Something had been collected.